I want to describe someone to you, and I want you to tell me quietly to yourself if you recognize her. She's the one who keeps the peace. She reads the room before she enters it, who softens her words before they leave her mouth, automatically, without even deciding to. She's the one that says yes when she sometimes means no. Not because she's dishonest, but because saying no has never felt quite safe. She's described by everyone around her as patient, gracious, and easy to be with. She comes home from every interaction having given something that she did not consciously choose to give, and who cannot fully explain why she's so tired. This woman is not easygoing. She's not simply a gracious person with a gentle personality. Her nervous system has learned at some point in her history, often very early, often in her first home, that conflict was dangerous, that her own needs were a liability, and that the safest thing she could do in any situation that felt threatening was to make herself useful, agreeable, unthreatening, to become, in the words of the therapist who first named this pattern, more appealing to the threat. This is called the fawn response, or the collapse response. It's not a personality trait, it's a survival strategy. And it's one of the most costly things a woman can carry into a marriage without knowing she's carrying it. Before we go further, if something in that description already felt uncomfortably familiar, the Detox Your Marriage community is a place where you can process this with other women who know exactly what it looks like from the inside. The link is down below. Now, let's go deeper into what this actually is and what it costs. Most people are familiar with the three classic responses to threat, right? Fight, flight, and freeze. Your nervous system detects danger and chooses one. Confront it, or run like heck from it, or freeze, go still, paralyze, and wait for it to pass. What most people do not know is that there is a fourth response. It was identified and named by psychotherapist Pete Walker in his foundational work on complex PTSD, CPTSD. And it completes the picture in a way that changes everything for women that we work with. Walker describes fawning as the process of trying to placate and serve those who are perceived as threatening in order to stay safe. Unlike fighting, fleeing, or freezing, fawning involves social behavior. It's relational appeasement. From a neuroscience perspective, fawning it's actually a hybrid state. It blends the high alert energy of the sympathetic nervous system, right, which is the engine behind the fight or flight, with the shutdown of the freeze response. So it keeps you mobilized and alert enough to read the social cues and perform the act of appeasement. But it also requires you to shut down your own authentic feelings, needs, and boundaries to do so. So read that again. It shuts down your own authentic feelings and needs. Not as a choice, but as a neurological requirement of the response itself. So the fawn response cannot function if your own needs are present and visible. So the system suppresses them. This is automatic. It's below the level of conscious decision. Walker observed that fawning appears with particular frequency in adults who grew up with caregivers who were narcissistic, emotionally unavailable, or unpredictably volatile. So the child who learns to fawn has discovered at a neurological level that her own preferences and needs can be dangerous or a liability. She didn't decide this. She learned it in the most formative environment of her life. And she brought it, unexamined and unnamed, into her. Trauma is not something you remember. It's something your nervous system learns. If you ever thought, I understand my trauma intellectually, but my body still does not feel safe. This book is written for you. In the Trauma Recovery Blueprint, I introduce the Relational Nervous System Integration Model. It's an integrative framework that bridges polyvagal theory, internal family systems, and EMDR-informed trauma healing. It helps explain how trauma reshapes the body, emotional patterns, relational expectations, and the nervous system itself. This is not simply a book about coping. This is a whole new framework for understanding healing. The Trauma Recovery Blueprint is out now on Amazon. Click the link below for more information. Here's why the fawn response is so difficult to identify in a marriage and why it's so rarely named for what it is. Right? It doesn't look like a problem. It actually looks like a virtue. It looks like patience when it's actually fear of conflict. It looks like generosity when it's actually the compulsive erasure of her own needs before they can lead to trouble. It looks like flexibility when it's actually the inability to hold a position long enough for it to be challenged. Right? Picture the couple, should we go to Yellowstone Park on our summer vacation or should we go to Niagara Falls? And she says, oh, where do you want to go? It sounds so virtuous. It looks like a good wife. And this is where the specific cruelty of the fawn response inside a Christian marriage reveals itself, because the language of Christian wifely virtue, right? Patience, long-suffering, deference, putting others first, maps almost perfectly onto the outward behavior of a woman in chronic fawn, which means that the response gets spiritual reinforcement. She's praised for it, and she's held up as a model of it. Her husband commends her for it at church for being such a virtuous wife. We get along so well. She is so agreeable, right? And she has no framework for distinguishing between the virtue that she is genuinely pursuing, right, and the trauma response that is running automatically underneath it. In practice, it sounds like this. She doesn't bring up the thing that hurt her because she's already decided before the conversation begins that the cost of bringing it up is going to be too high. And so she agrees with his version of events, not because she believes it, but because disagreeing feels dangerous in a way that she just can't really articulate. And so she apologizes not because she's wrong, but because an apology is faster and safer to get things back to baseline. She shapes herself daily around his preferences, his moods, his comfort, not from love exactly, but from a nervous system that's learned this is how you survive proximity to someone whose displeasure feels like danger. I want to spend some time here because this is where I want to be direct with you in the way that I think love requires. I want to speak the truth in love. The fawn response feels manageable, and that is part of what makes it so dangerous. It does not produce acute crisis. It does not announce itself as a problem, the way a fight response does. I mean, everybody around can see that's, right? She's yelling and she's screaming. That's what fight response looks like, and it's obvious. It's clear there's a problem. The fawn response runs quietly in the background, accomplishing its short-term purpose, the avoidance of conflict, the maintenance of a certain surface-level peace, all the while accumulating a cost that most women do not begin to understand until the account is, severely overdrawn. The most profound cost of the chronic fawn response is the loss of authentic identity, the gradual erosion of the sense of self that happens when a person spends years or decades organizing her behavior around others' needs and preferences rather than her own. The woman who's been fawning since childhood often arrives in adulthood with a profound uncertainty about who she actually is, what she actually wants, what she actually values, and what she actually feels. The fawn response has been so thorough and so long-standing that the authentic self has been almost entirely buried by the performed self. So she does not even know what she thinks because she spent so long thinking only what it was safe to think. She doesn't know what she feels because feelings have been suppressed before they have a chance to register. And doesn't really know what she wants because wanting things for herself became somewhere along the way something her nervous system learned to treat as a threat. So the long-term cost shows up as chronic stress, identity confusion, and relationships that feel stable on the surface but unstable underneath because honesty is missing. One of the most common consequences, which might be a surprise, is resentment. It sort of shows up sometimes and is misunderstood, sometimes as pettiness, but in reality, a healthy signal that a person is giving more than they can sustainably give. The cost also includes anxiety, depression, difficulties with authentic self-expression that accumulate quietly over the years until the weight becomes unmistakable. Now, I want to say something gently, but without softening it. If you've been fawning, if this is resonating with you, in your marriage, in your family of origin, across your adult life, you may not be simply a patient woman who needs to practice better communication. It could be you're a woman carrying a survival strategy that is currently operating as the primary relationship to yourself. And that's not a small thing, and that's not something to leave unaddressed. I think of a woman I have worked with, I'm going to call her Rachel here. She came to me because her marriage was in difficulty. Her husband was struggling with an alcohol use problem, and she had, for years, responded to that struggle the way she had responded to every struggle in her life, by managing, by making herself useful, by absorbing the disruption into her own body so that the surface of the family's life remained presentable. So she did not arrive identifying herself as someone with a trauma response. She wouldn't have understood that language or agreed with it in the beginning. She arrived identifying herself as someone who had tried everything. And that was the term she used. What I saw relatively quickly was a woman whose entire relational existence had been organized around the fawn response since childhood. Right? Her home growing up was one of those unpredictable environments where her own needs there was no room for them. She had learned before she even had words for it that the safest version of herself was a version of herself that was small and useful and agreeable. Straight A student in school. Every teacher throughout her schooling years said Rachel was just a great student. She's no problem at all, is what they said. Right? She had brought that version of herself, intact, unexamined, automatic, into a marriage, and it had been reinforced for, 20 plus years. So the work was not about her husband's drinking. I mean, that was a problem, don't get me wrong. But the work was about her nervous system, her permission to have needs, her ability to recognize within herself that, like, her husband has a problem. The slow, painful, genuinely courageous rediscovery of a self that had been suppressed for so long. She had come to believe it was simply absent, it was gone. It wasn't gone, it was just buried. So she described to me the first time she said what she actually thought, not to her husband, just to me, in that room. And it felt to her like she was speaking in a language that she had forgotten she even knew. That is the self the fawn response covers, and that self is worth going back for. I want to close by being direct about one more thing here. The fawn response does not resolve through insight alone. Understanding that you have been people-pleasing because of a nervous system response, as clarifying and as relieving as that understanding is, does not by itself retrain the response. That is the big misconception that reading another book is going to heal you. Reading another book, including my books, will help because it'll name it. It'll help you identify it. It'll help you recognize and track how it's showing up, when it's showing up. But fawning as a trauma response requires trauma treatment. to fully resolve. Since the nervous system's alarm response, it does not necessarily calm down through boundary setting exercises alone. The work that's required goes to the nervous system level, to the body's learned sense of what is safe and what is dangerous, to the supported patient process of teaching a nervous system new information. A nervous system that learned appeasement with survival needs to learn that now that expression is okay and safe. That feelings and a voice are not threats, but is actually your birthright. That's specific work, and it's real work, and it takes longer than a weekend workshop or another podcast. And a book of affirmations isn't going to cut it, I'm sorry. But that healing work is absolutely available. And the women who do it describe what is on the other side in terms that I still find, after 30 years, like moving and goosebumps sometimes. They say things like, I forgot what it felt like to know what I wanted. They say things like, I discovered that I can actually say what I want. Understand that the knowing is recoverable, that self is recoverable, and you deserve to find your true self. The fawn response is one of the primary patterns that I address in the Trauma Recovery Blueprint, my dedicated resource for people who are on the journey to heal the trauma that has accumulated in the nervous system wherever it has in their life. The Trauma Recovery Blueprint addresses the fawn response at a level where it actually lives in the nervous system, in the body's learned sense of safety, in the slow rebuilding of a sense of self that's been suppressed in service of survival for far too long. The book is available on Amazon right now. The link is in the description. I want to say something personal before I close. In 30 years of this work, I have never sat across from a woman with a chronic fawn response and thought, this is hopeless, she's too far gone, or this is too ingrained, or the self beneath the performance has been lost. I've never thought that, and I've never seen that, because I've never found it to be true. The self is there. She went quiet to survive, and that's not the same thing as lost. The Trauma Recovery Blueprint is how you go back and get her. The link is in the description. I hope you will use it, and I'll see you in the next video.